Welcome to the Feed the Soul Company podcast, a space I've created to share my story and to encourage you to share yours. I'm your host, Liv Setla, and I can't thank you enough for being here. With me today is our special guest, Dr. Chad. So, Dr. Chad was the Director of Counseling and Sports Psychology with UNLV Athletics. So, that's how I got to meet him. He worked with my team, we did a ton of activities. I got to work with them as well. And for me in my mental health journey, he was just super helpful. Starting off just distinguishing the difference between mental health and sports psychology. So, um, one, just helpful in myself, taking care of myself as a healthy human, but then also maximizing the mental side of the game to become the best athlete I can be on that side. But I'm super excited to have him on here. He's got a lot of great pieces of wisdom, and I've learned so much from him. So I'm so glad you guys will have the chance to do that too. But Dr. Chad, thank you so much for being here and introduce yourself to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Liv. Thanks for reaching out and having me. And congrats on your journey right now and finishing up your volleyball career and getting through a really tough time of just COVID too, and being one of the COVID kids through all this. So, congrats on getting to the other side and I think having a really good student athlete experience. And so, yeah, so my name is Dr. Chad Dorr. A lot of people call me Dr. Chad just in the sports psychology realm. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a sports psychologist. I have a certification called the CMPC, Certified Mental Performance Coach, which is through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, which is kind of like the highest credential for people to be able to provide performance psychology on top of with my license being able to be a licensed psychologist. And so, yeah, I've worked in a bunch of different athletic departments. I got my start after bouncing around for graduate school. I got my doctorate degree at James Madison University and my master's in Denver. And then I went all the way to Davis, California for my internship. So bounced around the country for a really long time in my 20s, just getting education and experience and figuring out how the heck I can do what I love and get paid for it and do it with awesome people. So, a lot of journeys across the country being really broke. And then my first job was with the Nebraska Cornhuskers for a few years, which was amazing and wonderful. And also, I think going to that highest level of college athletics when I was really young was pretty overwhelming for me, but like a wonderful experience for confidence. And then ending up doing the work as a director for UNLV for a while, and then kind of pivoting my life a little bit and moving back up to Reno, Nevada to be with my friends and my family and just be in private practice and kind of shift gears from being very career oriented and working a ton and moving around the country to being like, let me focus a little bit more on family and career as well. So my journey for the last 15 years has been kind of all over the place, but it's been nice to make an impact and see the country, and be where I'm at now.
Wow, okay. So first of all, there's so much in that answer that I want to ask you about. You did start to touch on your journey post-college, bouncing around, starting your journey of being a sports psychologist. You mentioned finishing up school in different states and then internship over in California. Can you kind of talk about like what brought you to these different places? Like how was that, especially in your early 20s, being in the space that I'm in now? What was that like for you?
Absolutely. So if we go right after high school, I was what is considered a lot of times in high school athletics to be a late bloomer. And so I physically developed a little bit later. I had a lot of really difficult injuries that shaped my experience in wanting to get into mental health and sports psychology. So when I was 13 years old, right before the start of high school, I was playing baseball for an all-star team and I was playing the outfield and a ball was hit over my head. And I remember there was a runner on first base and I'm like, I have to get this runner out at home. And so I remember grabbing the ball that was over my head and trying to throw it absolutely as hard as I could to the cutoff man. And when I threw the ball, I had this psychosomatic feeling like I had actually thrown my arm off. And it felt like, and I vividly remember this, even though it wasn't true, but it felt like my arm had flown off and it was like spinning. And then I kind of blacked out and I had this like blood curdling scream that still has like traumatized some of my friends and some of my friends' parents. And I was going in and out of consciousness. And what happened was when I had thrown that baseball, I had snapped my humerus bone in half. And so I woke up in the hospital and they were like, you may have leukemia. This may have been a freak thing. Like, we don't know, but like, this is wild that this happened. And it's happened to a couple professional baseball players, but it was just this unbelievable experience. And so as I had that, my arm was immobilized for a really long time. And that was the start of my freshman year of high school. And so I was pretty much like, I don't know if I'm going to be playing sports again, if I'm going to ever throw a ball again. And that, for someone that's identity was really wrapped up in sports and a lot of my friends being athletes, like that wrecked me to start high school and just have my arm in a sling, not knowing what I was going to be able to do. And it was really depressing and it was really difficult. And in that time, I'm very grateful that I had a lot of support from friends and family and different coaches. And so I remember I was able to play freshman basketball that year, but I was like just awful and so scared. And then I had to really do a lot of rehab to go from like throwing a tennis ball like 10 to 5 to 10 feet to be able to like work into actually getting back on a mound and going out there and like throwing again, which for me was like a 2 or 3 year process basically to get back and feel confident that I was going to be able to really like let it rip and not have my arm snap. So that was for me the big like mental hurdle to be able to figure out how the heck am I going to do this. So that was being able to get back on a mound a year and a half later and just to be able to pitch, and whether it was successful or not was like a huge accomplishment for me. And I remember at that time really starting to look at like, how do I be the person that I needed at this time? And I think that that was really powerful for me, especially as later in my high school career, I started to hit some more mental roadblocks in terms of performance and consistency and zero idea on how to take care of myself. Just, I think and I think you hear that from a lot of athletes. It's like there's the talent, but then you're inconsistent. Then there's just these like underlying things of how you sleep and eat and show up every day ready and all of those things. And I remember my amazing high school baseball coach gave me a book called Heads Up Baseball by Ken Ravizza. And Ken's passed away recently, but that book's made a huge impact on so many people's lives. And he worked with the Angels for a while and worked with the Cubs when they won the World Series. And that book really, I would say, like changed my life in terms of, oh, we work on mental skills and our mental wellness the same way that we work on our physical skills. And I really remember that plus understanding what work ethic actually meant, of how much you need to hit and how much you need to pitch and practice and sacrifice your social life and some of those things, to the point where I actually had a really good end of my senior year. And so at that time, I was able to go play junior college at Feather River, which is up in Northern California, a really small school. Almost everyone that goes there is an athlete. So it was a really fun environment. A lot of people from Northern Nevada went up there. And I went up there, and it was one of those experiences where I suddenly am the Friday night starter as a freshman and realize I am completely not equipped to be able to handle that pressure, that stress, that consistency. And you think you are until you get on the rubber and there's tons of scouts there with their radar guns and you kind of feel the weight of the world and you just have that moment where you're like, I can't do this. And it's the worst feeling in the world. It's awful. And at that time, I also wasn't doing a great job at taking care of myself, and my arm started to just like deteriorate again. And so my velocity started going down. I was all over the place. I was making tons of errors. And during that time, I had a bunch of just off the field stuff going on, and I was just deteriorating to the point where I had to medical redshirt. And that was really where I started to understand like how hard it is to be a college athlete as well. Like there's one part about the performance part, and then there's the other thing when things aren't going well, or you have that very humbling moment, like how do you take care of yourself? How do you get support? How do you manage it on the back end as well? And so that summer and that spring were really lonely and isolating, as the team had a ton of success and was traveling all the time. And I just like go home and hang out with my family and my friends. And I'm really grateful for the support that I had at that time. Um, and so being able to come back that next year, and while I still had arm injuries, was just way more mentally healthy, I think. And I feel like I was able to end my baseball career in a way that I was really proud of. I think for me was really inspiring, which led me when I went back to just undergrad at UNR to look at like how do I become a mental health professional or a sports psychologist or a coach? And I was just kind of trying out all the different hats. And then at that time, looking at different programs, the University of Denver was like the ideal for all of those. And so that's how I ended up there, which was a wonderful place. There's so many of us now. I was there from 2012 to 2014 that are working with the Olympic Committee and professional sports and directors at really big athletic departments, and is really wonderful for all of us in our early 20s to go there and kind of figuring out our lives and figuring out how to do this. And that was really wonderful. And then at that time, I also realized I probably am going to need more education in the mental health side. And so during that time, I was looking at doc programs, and that is an incredibly stressful experience. And I'm very grateful that I was able to go to James Madison University with Dr. Bob Harmison, who's just an amazingly wonderful person. And he was able to really mentor me, kind of teach me not just the art of how to provide psychotherapy, but how to be in an athletic department where you're able to connect with student athletes so that they want to come in, what that looks like, how to navigate coaches, how to help coaches as well. So I was really grateful to be able to do that. And then Davis was internship. And so basically you apply to a bunch of places, you rank them, they rank you, you wake up around Valentine's Day, and then it's like, hey, you're heading to California. And so it's kind of a lottery. And it was a really fun experience. I got to go there with my brother because Davis, California is about 2.5 hours away from Reno. And so that was kind of my educational journey was sort of, I had all of these difficulties in high school and early college. And I was like, I just want to be the person that I needed at this time. And then it just kind of led to this process to go do that with, people that are, around your age. And then, now in private practice, seeing like a multitude of different people from all age ranges.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all that. So, starting off, there's so much about your story that I think so many people listening can relate to, like coming back from injury, also the mental roadblock with that. Um, well, even you mentioned the consistency thing. Um, I can relate to that as well. Like, as you know, like my college journey has always been about being consistent. Even in club volleyball, my mom and my parents, coaches would always say, like, live like you work super hard. You have talent, obviously, enough to get you to the level I got to, but then just I need to be more consistent. And that's something I've always struggled with. Like, it's like I'm trying to be consistent, but like finding consistency is like almost like a happy medium. And I'm always used to like just pushing myself, like gas pedal to the floor, like giving it my all, because I'm like, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Why wouldn't I give anything less? But then, like, I learned there's like an art to it. Um, and finding that, and it's not just consistency on the court or on the field. It comes from how you take care of yourself off the court, and it's more than just, it's more of like a holistic thing, not just you can do it in one area but not the other. At least that's what I found with my journey, but just some things I can relate to like on my experience and hearing you talk about yours, but yeah, just some of that.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things being more in the volleyball world and learning more about it by just being around y'all and working with different coaches and different teams is like that fine motor aspect of it. And it's so precise, and you have to really be in control of your emotions for that. Just like if you're gonna pitch or if you're gonna hit a baseball. And I feel like I was able to start to connect to some of those things because as I was like reflecting on my career, I got into the batter's box, I got on the mound. Like if I wasn't anxious and I was confident, then I was excited. And it's like that volume of intensity was like too high. And then my mechanics would break down. Like my shoulder would be flying open, or I would just be swinging at like the worst pitches. And I don't think for me in those situations, it was like a confidence thing because it was like I was hitting the ball really well and throwing good bullpens. It's like I would get out there and I was just like so amped and so excited to be there. And I think part of being so excited to be there was because of my injury history. And it was
Mm.
just like, I get to play. This is amazing. But then I was like too amped up and my
Mm.
eyes are bouncing all over the place. And I'm trying to like, hit a 500-foot home run, like and just swinging at terrible stuff. And I think for me, really learning like what actually is that helpful range of emotion for me, and like slow the heck down and like trust your body and like have enough intensity, I think was really helpful for me. And I think sometimes you see that too. People are like so excited. And, I can think about like your position where if you're like so pumped to be out there and then you're like super tense and you're trying to like absolutely have the perfect pass and then you're shanking it because you're so tense. And so that ability to like really settle in, whether you're excited or anxious, I think is like so important. And it's so hard to do because you have to really figure out how to practice that like competitive groundedness. And when you don't, and you really struggle with that, and then how you take care of yourself off the field and manage that. And if you're not sleeping well, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're stressed out, it's just going to amplify that even more. And so I think that those were all of the things that, you start working with more people when you get to my age, or, reading more books, and you're like, man, I wish I knew this when I was like 16, 17, 18. But that's like part of the journey of it for sure.
That's like my entire brand right now. Like I just want to be what I wish I had when I was like 16, 17. Um, that's really interesting you talk about like that level of intensity because as you're saying that, like I can imagine myself like during games where I was like just way too excited or like for me starting off, I guess I can relate with the injury history too. Like my freshman and also with COVID. So coming into my freshman year, it was just COVID. So then playing was like, oh, this is like new again. It's like weird, but it's like, okay, we've had this time off for so long. And then halfway through my freshman year, I got a concussion, so I was out for a pretty long time. So then sophomore year, I was still working through like practice, like just getting myself back into things. Then my junior year, when I was at the level, like, okay, I can get time on the floor and compete, I was like figuring out how to be my competitor self. Like I've always been competitive, but then like the fine tuning of like how do I show up on that intensity scale the best to my abilities. And so then confidence has always been something that I've struggled with, always just because I've been so hard on myself. So when I was on the floor, you can't be nitpicky and like telling yourself like, oh, that should have been better here, because in game time you just have to do it and then afterwards reflect on it. But I didn't know that. So I was trying to be perfect. And then I halfway through junior year, I was like, you know what? F it. Like it was me and Alyssa, my teammate. We like called it like Lego Batman mode. Like if there's like a scene in the Lego Batman movie where he's like, I don't have any feelings and nothing, I feel nothing but rage. And so we were just like trying to embody that. And like I just like turned it my volume all the way up, my intensity all the way up. Like I only listened to like heavy metal, like rage music before games. And it was like nonstop. Like from the point of serve and pass ended, we have like 30 minutes before we can like get back, like warming up again. I like listened to like a rage playlist that entire time because I was like, if I let my mind slip for a second and start thinking about, oh, I could have done that better, I could have done this better, I would have like hurt my confidence before I got into the game. So I was like, but then I learned like, okay, that's when I was burning out too, because I'm like, I can't physically do that for that long because it's kind of exhausting. And then to go play a game, and then I would do an extra workout after. So it's like, okay, there's obviously got to be a sweet spot. It doesn't have to be that exhausting, but also I shouldn't have to feel like any moment I'll dip too low. So then my senior year, I was happy with how I figured out that volume and intensity, but in finding like my happy place with playing. Um, but I just wanted to speak on just like finding that happy medium, and it kind of comes from like you come from a place where like you don't have it at all, like being out or injured, and then you finally get the chance to, then maybe you overdo it. Um, And I guess as I go forward with my like mental health professional career, what I want to do, I want to be teaching young athletes or showing them how to find this happy balance. How do you take care of yourself and be the best athlete you can be? But kind of a disclaimer, you kind of have to push your limits a little bit on it just to find it. What do you think about that?
I completely agree because I feel like so much of, especially your sport, and what I realized about baseball too, like so many sports, is there's sort of this Goldilocks principle, right? There's like this sweet spot, like not too hot, not too cold, but you have to really understand what too hot or too cold is. And I think one of the challenges with a lot of self-help and a lot of like motivational sports psychology is it's just people like running through walls or being up at 4 a.m. pushing, and there's like sort of this intensity background of like you gotta like want it, you gotta love it. And there's this huge work ethic part, especially I think for the weight room to really like grow and push, like in terms of that context, like that's where that mindset really, really is important. But then I think that ability to really like settle in and stay loose and trust yourself is, I think, essential too. And then on the back end, from like a mental health standpoint, if you're not taking care of yourself, so you're not recovering, if you're feeling really like anxious, depressed, overwhelmed, answering all these like crisis late night texts, like substance use, when your sleep is going to get really impacted, and then you're going to feel really drained, and then you're going to have to like almost overcompensate to try to make up for not recovering. And then sometimes you're turning the volume too high and trying too much, or you don't have enough gas and you're just like out of sync, I think, in terms of all that. And I think that that's something I really realized late in high school was the way I was taking care of myself outside, especially like on weekends. You'd get back on Monday and then you'd feel like you'd have to give 110% to get back to your baseline, and just kind of like wrecking your progress. And then you don't know like what consistency and balance is in terms of that. And so I think that that's where a lot of times you see like the idea of like being in your prime. There's like a mental prime where you just get it all, but a lot of times your mental prime is a little bit past your physical prime, which is like one of the more frustrating things. Like you see like the young athlete that just like hasn't figured it out yet. And then you've got the old savvy vet that like has all the mental part, but then physically they're not there. And so ideally, if you can get as like mentally wise as possible at an earlier age when you have the physical ability, that's where you're able to really thrive. And that's easier said than done, I think, in terms of that, because a lot of people have that kind of component where it's like, oh, I was just figuring out and then my career's over, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, and then I think to speak as well, because I think there'd be a lot of volleyball athletes that are listening to this. One of the challenges is I think being a DS or a libero or a setter is way different than being a middle or an outside hitter in terms of intensity. And so the one size fits all approach sometimes doesn't necessarily work. I think there's like some fundamental mental skills about breathing and routines and self-talk, but then they're also completely different in terms of like the requirements of the position from an emotional standpoint too, to be able to like maximize your performance. And so that's where I think it gets really nuanced of like working with someone performance wise as well to be able to manage some of those things.
Oh, for sure. Like, I think just to speak on my journey, like all of the breathing techniques, like I remember you sitting in front of our team and being like, hey, these are some things that help you with like composure or different things or confidence. Like self-talk helps with confidence. And I remember being like, okay, yeah, I've heard this before. I've been told this, but like it took me time to figure out actually, oh, what did I tell myself? And then, like, I remember we would talk about, like, okay, like this balance and this art of finding what works best for me. And I remember you would remind me, like, hey, but remember your position's different than like your teammate whose job is like to hit the crap out of the ball. So they're gonna require like a different level. So again, like really having to self-reflect and look at, okay, what works best for me. And I think for young athletes, especially, it's hard at a younger age because they want to do what everyone else is doing. So to really look at yourself and listen to what you're doing and or like because I know, oh, I don't know what works for me because this anything could work for me because I was so like versatile. So I think like young athletes who maybe are struggling to figure out to like trust themselves, listen to their gut, like what actually works for them. Do you have any advice for like young athletes trying to figure this out?
I think the first thing when I work with a lot of younger athletes is just really focus on being curious and growing versus being really critical. Um, be a sponge when you're young, like you have to figure out some of those things through a lot of trial and error. And that's where a lot of people talk about that growth mindset is, work really hard and push yourself in practice, but then know that what you're trying to do is really hard and it's really tricky. And that mental piece takes a long time. Just like you have click moments with your passing or digging of like, oh, I have to like focus on this part of the ball, or I have to like have my hands feel this way or this way. Like you just have to show up and be a sponge and just try some different things to get that click moment. And I think the people that struggle the most to have those click moments and then also struggle the most with having sport impact their mental health is that there's this too much of a sense of urgency at a young age that I've got to like figure it out right now. And I think that pressure comes from a lot of places of to get a scholarship, to perform well right now, to please parents, to please teammates, et cetera. But if you're able to A, let that go, and B, get in an environment that like promotes like a lot of learning and growing and trying new things, you can kind of like loosen up and start to see where like your emotional sweet spot is and where you need to focus and what all of that looks like. And so I think that's one of the really important things that I first try to do is like, let's just get you in a curious mindset and try a bunch of stuff. And then as you're starting to narrow that down, then let's look at how you turn that into just like simple competitiveness where you kind of cut off your head and let your body do the work. But I think that's secondary to just like really trying to be curious. And part of that's getting in a really good environment when you're younger. That's going to promote that.
I really love that. It's kind of a message to like young athletes and parents too, because um again, the pressures like it's and nowadays it's like it's more than ever, I feel like. So that's really good advice. And I just want to ask real quickly, because I know not everyone may be able to relate to this, but I remember being like 16, 17, and like the process of like letting go was something I had to learn. Like some people it's come super easily and they're just like, oh, like duh. But like for me, I had to learn it. And I don't necessarily know what I would say to my younger self about that. And you even said like, oh, there's this urgency to like have it figured all out right now. And like I feel like that's just like something I do. So for maybe people that are kind of in that space, like, hey, I have a hard time letting go, or like, um, how do I take pressure off myself? I guess like for young athletes who don't know where to start with that, um, maybe what's something you could tell them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the helpful ways to do it, and it can get a little tricky and it takes some work, is really developing the most helpful inner coach. And I think sometimes, and I definitely remember, I can almost sit here and think about going back to like 16 years old and feeling like tense and my self-talk just being super, 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 super fast and like feeling my shoulders being tense and being like, you've got to throw strikes and you've got to have a sense of urgency and you got to want it and you've got to be able to do this. And then you just, your eyes are all over the place and you feel so scattered and you don't know what to do. And you're just like, I'm just going to run through this wall. And then, as a pitcher or as a hitter, you're tense and your body can't do what it needs to do and you're performing worse. And so I think the first thing is that's usually this kind of like inner heckler or this like really demeaning coach. And I think being able to have this coach and it's like you almost like listen to that coach and you slow down and you have this like compassionate tone with your self-talk. Like you change the tone of your self-talk and it's like, hey, you're okay. Like just let's chill out. Let's take a slow breath. Like, and then let's really look at like what's just an easy, simple thing to focus on right now and have like an anchor for yourself. And for me, so much, I was such a visual athlete. And so for me, it was like, as a pitcher, like, let me just look at like the bottom part of the glove and just keep my head really smooth and just hit that glove. Because like when I was like primal pitching or Neanderthal pitching, it's like my eyes were everywhere and I was just trying to like rip it as hard as I could, or I was in fear and like really tense. And so it was just like, let's stay really loose and just hit the glove. But like, I think looking back when I was performing really well, I changed my self-talk tone. Like a lot of times I think we talk about what we're saying to ourselves, but I almost like try, like I think it's even easier to shift to like have this like chill out voice because we've all had those coaches or those teammates or parents that just kind of like put their arm around you and they're like, "Hey, like you're all right." Or in those times where maybe you need to bump up, it's like a little bit more intense, but it's like a compassionate intensity, but it's like the tone of the self-talk, I think. And sometimes if you can work on shifting that, that may help you like self-regulate and just get into more of that like calm state versus having that like just chatter about all the pressure that's like so tense. And so I think that's something that I've been picking up more talking with people is like almost like change the tone of your self-talk before the content of it.
That's super helpful. Like, I know, just reflecting on my journey, that's something that changed for me because it's always been like, yeah, I get it. Self-talk is helpful, but like just the nuances of it and figuring out what works for me. Like now reflecting on my journey, like toward the end of my senior year of college, I started like I remember, well, comparing it like club season, I'd be like, I have to dig this ball, or I pass this ball, like, go, go. Like this very, like you talked about, this very like amped self-talk. And then toward my senior year, it's like, oh, just pass, just like just a different tone. So like, I hopefully listeners who are struggling with that find it helpful as well. But I mentioned this earlier, but I do want to kind of, I guess, define or start to describe like these differences of like because you've been able to help me with my mental health side, but then also sports psychology side, and maybe speak on the difference between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with performance psychology or sports psychology. A lot of times the term sports psychology can kind of encompass everything. And then if you want to talk in like nuance, like the idea of like mental performance or like mental skills coaching, um, I think a lot of times that's what I learned at Denver that I love was the ability to perform in your craft at your best on demand when it matters most. And so a lot of times it's really rooted in like positive psychology or this ability on how do we thrive and flourish. And so we're going from healthy state to flourishing, right? And so that a lot of times is a different set of skill sets of like, hey, I'm good in my life, but here's the skills that I can do to get better at my craft or like even better at my wellness. And so a lot of times I label that as mental performance. I think if we're talking about mental health or like mental health disorders, that's getting back to like wellness, right? And so that's like, hey, there's things that are going on, whether it's in my sport, in my life, et cetera, that I'm not even functioning at baseline. And so that's where I just have so much impairment in my functioning, in my interactions, in my sleep, all of those components. And we're just trying to get you just functioning back to normal. Like we're not thinking about thriving. We're just like we just want to get you back in terms of that. And I think that those are some of the differences. And I think you see a lot of people go oscillate back and forth of like, we need to, get you back here to get you here in a very simple way that may be kind of extreme. Is sometimes mental health is about survival, and then mental performance is about thriving, and obviously like not everyone's in like a survival mode, but sometimes it can feel that way. And so there's some really helpful infographics that like the Association for Applied Sports Psychology have, and some of the really amazing Power Four athletic departments that'll show kind of the continuum of care in terms of that. And so, it's a little bit different in terms of what everybody needs. And sometimes people are performing pretty well, but then they've just got a ton going on behind the scenes that's really impacting them, whether it's like their environment or their family or relationships. And they might be performing really well, but then also there's other things that are really like dropping that they need to, take an account for. And so I think that's the continuum when you're looking for providers. And then I do think that it's really helpful from the idea of cultural competency, that if you're looking for mental health treatment, really finding someone that just like understands the language of sport. Because for people that really identify as athletes, if the person doesn't understand the pressures and challenges of sport and the sacrifices, a lot of times the easiest intervention is like, well, just quit. But not understanding like how do we navigate all of these things, diversify our identity, still have a good work ethic. And so you may not necessarily need to find like a sports psychologist, but find someone that has like the cultural competency in understanding what their athletic environment is, especially I think for adolescents. Like a lot of people just don't understand what travel sports look like,
Yeah.
and that ability to have a therapist that's like, oh, okay, I get, or have some understanding or some reading on what this is like. So then let's talk about how you navigate that, or how there may be pressure from parents or coaches or other external sources that may also be impacting it. And so that's one thing I would definitely say is you may not need to find like a registered sports psychologist, or someone that has as much background as me, but try to find someone that just has the cultural competency and like what athletics looks like.
Love this answer. Starting off, I loved how you described the beginning of like, okay, It's taking you from maybe getting you back to baseline, that's like mental health, and then like from like living to flourishing. Um, and then also how it's not just okay, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. It's like these can both exist at the same time. Um, because just reflecting on my experience, it's like I remember in college, like I would say each year was like a chapter of my mental health that basically taught me in order for me to be competing at my best level, like flourishing, I had to take care of I needed to get back to who I was. And for me, it was finding what like a healthy baseline was because with COVID and then just my experience, like my dad passing away and then injury freshman year was like I thought survival mode was my baseline. And I think a lot of high school athletes, they think, I'm not going to assume, but I have a feeling that like pushing to the max all the time and feeling like this like aggressive state is like normal, but it's like that's not really, it's not always a healthy baseline. Like I thought, oh yeah, this is like this is me, this is normal. But it's like that really isn't normal. So like learning that and then like just hearing you describe, okay, and but they also can exist at the same time. Like my senior year of high school, I wasn't going to school, um, and I wasn't taking care of myself necessarily, but I would go to practice every day, work my ass off, push myself in workouts. So I was like showing up at that end. So I guess like one, just a reminder of like everyone's going through different things. So like that's probably just treat each other with kindness. But then I guess like when I didn't know the real difference between these two until meeting Dr. Chad, but it's like um I could be feeling good and being like, "Oh yeah, I'm good with my life. I don't need to see the sports psychologist because I'm good now. I'm happy. Like I'm baseline." But then it's like, "Oh, you can still meet with them to like flourish, to like to even like that 1% better idea of like working hard every day. It's like you can do that too with your mental health of like, "Oh, yes, I'm feeling better, but I can become a better athlete by learning different things or like trying new things or still like connecting with them about like checking in, so it doesn't have to just be a, oh, survival mode state. It can also be a different side of the spectrum, like, oh, I just genuinely want to learn more and just get better. So, um, just wanted to speak on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I realized a little bit more towards the latter half of my time at UNLV with more of the performance psych part, like once we with certain individuals like accomplish like treatment goals to resolve, depression or anxiety or get that under management or substance use, and then they were wanting to work more into that performance part and kind of seeing that continuum. I really looked at it almost in a same way as like a strength coach of kind of this idea of the lifts, how to program, how to get in the weight room and work hard. But sometimes it's really helpful to just like talk with a personal trainer or a strength coach about like optimizing and just being able to talk through here's what's working, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I want to focus on. And just getting a little bit of outside feedback on maybe just like tiny tweaks, like week in and week out. And I think that was really fun work. There's a kind of the initial like skill building phase, but then there's just kind of talking through, and it's really wonderful if you're able to do it with a coach. And sometimes it's challenging to do it with a coach because you worry if you're too vulnerable with a coach, it may impact like your playing time and things like that. And I think that was one thing I realized was trying to kind of create a space for people to just talk openly and more vulnerably without that fear that that may impact like I don't think this person believes in themselves or components like that. So being able to really just like talk through here's a little small instance in my match or in this quarter or in this inning, and here's I don't think that this skill necessarily works super well, so here's how I want to really try to focus on that next time, or here's my intention for the week. And I think that ability to talk through and debrief really like accelerates learning because you're helping people be like more intentional. And I think really good coaches do that amazingly, be able to like help athletes learn how to learn better. And I feel like that was a role for me from the performance part, like week in and week out, that I think was really valuable was just teaching people how to build off of success too.
I really love that. And then again, I'm thinking like of the space, like I'm finishing up my college career playing and like this is what I want to do. So I'm like looking up to you of like I want to be the space that athletes feel comfortable like sharing, having that time to work through these things. And then like especially without the pressure of like, oh, I don't want my coach to know, or like sometimes, oh, my parents, like they don't necessarily support me in this way. So like I want to be that space for them. But I also want to go back to the point you made before about um, that cultural competency of like understanding, like that person to be understanding with it. Because I remember in high school, I had a therapist. First of all, I found it really helpful to like bounce back and forth with someone with ideas. Like, yes, um, it would be nice for someone, okay, I would just talk for an hour and they sit there and then just listened. But then I realized like you were super helpful for me because it was like, okay, it's like we're figuring it out together. It's not just a okay, listening, I'm like talking to a wall. So some people might need, okay, I just need to get it all out, but then some people might need like, okay, let's like work through it together. And then also um with the cultural competency of like knowing the athlete's schedule, I remember like I had a therapist which helped me with my mental health at the time, but like again, it's not going to help me become the better athlete because I remember putting so much pressure on myself and they said, "Okay, well, how could let's what can you take off your plate?" So if as soon as like someone's hitting a point of like overwhelmed or like pushing themselves too much, it's like, "Okay, how can we relieve pressure?" But their way was like, "Okay, let's take off sports." And for me, that was like that wasn't an option because it's like moving my body, that's like what I enjoy to do, and that's also my social time. So that's like all of my like that's like my lifeline, but it's like how do I live in a space where I can do that but also make time to take care of myself because it's you can't you can't do one or the other, like you it has to be both. So anything with especially working with you is helpful for me to be like, yeah, like I don't have an option to quit. Quitting isn't an option. And it's like, okay, but with the schedule we have, let's it's possible, but it's like, yeah, maybe at practice you don't like think you're perfect. Like maybe the self-talk is I showed up today. I'm proud of getting out of bed and still being able to do everything that is on the list to do, but then just like change that mental perspective of how you're able to relieve pressure when you can't physically take something off your plate. But that was super helpful for me at least.
I mean, I really remember my first 6 months at Nebraska. And, I lived some of the college lifestyle, but this was pre 2012 with smartphones. And I sound so old, but it's like we had 200 text messages a month. I probably send more than 200 frequently in a day. And there was just more idle time. I think that was just culture. There was just more idle time. There wasn't as many things pulling and grabbing our attention. And I also think at that time, I don't think athletes as much felt the responsibility of celebrity, even if you're at a G5 school versus a P4 or a D2 or junior college. And I really remember being like, oh my gosh, these kids have so much on their plates. Like they're expected to get a 4.0, to absolutely let it rip in the weight room, practice unbelievable hours, travel all the time. Oh, and then here's all of this like community service or now NIL stuff. Like if you're in that space, so then and also in those spaces you have to seem like you've got it all together. And then on top of that, like you're between 18 and 24 and you're trying to figure out how to like build relationships and make friends and who you are. And it's like, when the heck are you gonna do that and have some of that time? And so you have to be so organized and good with your time. And when you cut stuff, it has to be like little things between the requirements. And it's super, super tough to be able to do that and understand that and to figure out how to get into a flow of it. And that's where one of the most helpful mental health skills for college athletes is just getting organized and figuring out a system so that you can actually block out like, I've got a half an hour, let me cut the distraction so I can just like turn off, or let me add something that just feels like more mindful or enjoyable, or let me figure out like what friendships do I need to have less emphasis on me, like just but like little nuances versus I think a lot of times cutting big things. And there's times where you need to cut big things in the name of like safety and security and some of those things. But I think so much of that is like how do you make your time in the little bit like you've talked about I think how do you feed the soul in these little spaces when I have
Yeah.
the ability to and that was just shocking to me, but that's also just like part of it. And then I wanted to ask you this because I think this might be helpful for high school athletes going in. this idea of like expectations versus reality on what college athletics is like. And a lot of times, like mental health challenges can happen when your expectations and your reality are way out of sync. And so, what were your expectations of what college volleyball was going to be like versus like what's the reality of what college volleyball is like?
Ooh, good question, Dr. Chad. Um, well, me personally, I remember being told about the differences about D1 and D2 volleyball. And D1 was like, volleyball's your life. You don't have time for anything else. And then D2 was like, oh, if you want more of a social life, go D2. That's like so like oversimplified. And now going through it, and then my sister went D2 and then ended up transferring to a D1 for her experience. But it's like there's so much more that goes into the decision between going D1 or D2, starting off. But I thought, oh yeah, no, I love to work hard and I'm pretty like focused and I don't really need to like hang out with friends and all that. Like my friends will be on my team, so I'll go D1. So then I went D1, went to UNLV, and I thought that I could get away with just like not having a social life. Like that sounds so dumb, but like um I just thought like I could just work hard and I've always believed in like merit, like if you work hard, good things will happen to you. But then expectations, I thought it was also that like it's that very like transparent like that formula, you work hard, good things happen. But real life, that's not always what happens. It doesn't work out like that. Life happens and you need luck. You need sometimes like you need your coaches to like you sometimes. You need your teammates to like you. You need like it just like there's so much that goes into it and it's not just hard work. It's also taking care of yourself. It's like a holistic thing. So like thinking about end of high school, like yeah, I showed up to practice. I gave it my all and then I was in the gym doing that. But then on outside the gym, like I had no idea who I was as a person. Every single moment I had, I would take naps or sleep just to like zone out and like so like learning who you are as a person and um carving out time for that in sports, it's like a real thing and it can be exhausting. Like I remember coming or even I remember trying out like new mental or sports psychology tips or something like in practice, like trying new self-talks during practice and coming home super exhausted. But it was like practice was like only like an hour or 2 hours, but why am I more tired? Like I didn't know that like takes a toll on my body as well. So like I don't know, those are just some kind of different things off the top of my head, like expecting it to be one way, but it's way different. And then I think the most basic answer would be like the scheduling. Like, oh, you have to go from one thing to the next. But then I actually didn't couldn't like picture it. Like I remember Coach Mel, she's been on the podcast. I remember recruiting, she would tell me like, hey, it's like a you gotta push yourself like to the limit. Like, do I have one more sprint in me? Do I have one more rep in me? Do I have one more? And I remember being like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can in the weight room, I like I got that. But then it was like finding the nuance of like, oh, now it's time to have fun. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I'm supposed to have fun. Like, I had to learn how to have fun, which is weird, but like enjoy it. And I was like, but I can work hard. Like, I'm good at that. Like, that's not, don't think everyone can say that, like, or relate to that in some sense. Like, I know some people might go D1 because it's like, oh, like, I like the community or like I don't know, just different things. But that was just my experience with it. Um, I love that question, but yeah, just like expecting it to just be work hard, good things happen, but it's a lot more and a lot different than that. And I wish, like, I guess advice to tell myself coming in, just be more open-minded and be that sponge. Like, it's just learning. Like, it doesn't, I thought I had to like prove myself every single day, which that's just like the hard worker and competitor in me, like, prove it. Like, I don't know, just like a motivator standpoint, but like, um, you actually told me this. It was like you need to like learn how to demotivate. So I didn't know that was coming from me. Like demotivate. Like what do you mean demotivate? Like all athletes, you need to be motivated. You need to work hard. You need to give it your all 100%. And like those are the things that were actually making me worse. Like later in my career. So like unlearning that was like a big thing. But yeah, that's like Some reflection there.
Totally. And yeah, I think about all the different freshman athletes I've worked with and then my own experience, and everybody's so different with where they come into college sports and what they need to improve on. And I think for me, it was I had no idea how to work hard in the weight room. And there was just some underlying beliefs at that time that are so wrong now of if you're an athlete, you're an athlete and you're good. And you don't really have to lift. You're a baseball player, you're a pitcher. Um, it's so wrong. And then we lifted really late. So we lifted at like 7 o'clock after practice and after class. And I was always just gassed. And I just like wanted to go, I sound like such a baseball player, just go play MLB the Show and just kind of like unwind and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, those were parts of me where I didn't have strong enough legs. And then so more of the stress went onto my elbow and then I hurt myself and then I didn't recover. And you look at the people that really thrived at that time were really disciplined in the weight room. And for me, it was just like I had no conception of that until like too late, like towards like the very end of my career of like, oh, you got to take this seriously and like carve out that time. And it was just classic like misconceptions of things in terms of like how do I want to allocate my time. And then you see some of the freshmen that come in that don't have a social life and then they kind of alienate themselves from their teammates and they like work so hard, but then they're so tense that they're making mistakes and they just feel like they're slamming their head on a wall. And then you have like the opposite spectrum of the people that I think come into college athletics and then they're like, oh, I had so much fun on my recruiting trip. This is what it's like every day. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
it's not.
No.
It's not. Your
Yeah.
recruiting trip is super fun. That's like the tiniest sliver of your student athlete experience. And then kind of not develop at the same pace of people and then try to swing it in the other way, and so everybody I think comes into college athletics in a different part. And I think the earlier you can sort of dial in that sweet spot between work ethic, relaxation, social life, and it's so nuanced for everybody depending on your needs. I think that's usually what I see for people that are able to really like thrive earlier in their career versus kind of that stumble and figure it out. And again, I had no conception on how to do it. I didn't even reflect on that until I was like working with more student athletes and being like, where did I completely screw up my career? I got to
Where
see
did I go
some of
wrong?
those things. And it was like, a decade later.
I love that, like, the other perspective, the other side of it, like other athletes, what they face, and then like what other people are expecting. Yeah, like I have my experience, and so I'll speak on that. I'm not a professional or certified by any means, but I just love hearing all the other perspectives and all the wisdom you bring. I also want to ask you more about your time in Nebraska. You said it was pretty early on in your career, and just that level, like high athletics. What's that like on your side of things, like being on the staff of this super high pressure environment?
Well, I think the first thing about Nebraska that was just amazing was how invested they are in the success of their student athletes and like legit funding it. I think now they have, 4+ sports psychologists. Everybody's got a dietitian and strength coach, and there's so many academic advisors, and they're very aware that like what we're going to put you through is immensely hard. So we're going to give you every resource to like make it easier on you. And I mean, that's what it takes every sport sells out. I mean, I remember like being at volleyball and it's the spring game and it's sold out in, something that's way bigger than Cox Pavilion, with the Devaney Center. And that's just the culture of it. And you're a freshman coming in and everybody knows like your whole background, and it's just it's a different level when you're at that place. And I think for me, one of the interesting things that I realized like going into that situation, I'm super grateful for going into that situation, was I personally was like wanting to get to that level in my own career, like my own like college career so much
Mhm.
that I had so much imposter syndrome coming in. It took me like a year before I was like, I actually like belong. And then also, I think, for me, I was pretty isolated like when I was out there. And I think that impacted me being able to function. And I realized for me professionally, I need to be around my friends and my family to really like thrive and have the energy to like make a big impact on the people that I want to. And I think that was a big realization for me. But the pressure at those high levels was so intense. And so that ability I think there to really be able to, you have to have so much of your identity be an athlete to have that motivation and that work ethic. But if it's every single thing and you're not doing well, like it'll break you. And so I think that that was, it's hard to, it's easy to like say it, but then when you see it and you experience it and you live it with student athletes and staff on a day-to-day basis, like it changes things. Like it's very much professional there in a really cool and amazing way in terms of like the infrastructure and the support. But I think for me as, a pre-licensed clinician kind of going into that, it was, it also taught me that I need to live a lifestyle like these athletes and really take care of myself if I'm going to be able to like do my best there too. And so there was very much a jump in, and I had some wonderful support from all the people that I worked with and loved everybody there. But it was, I almost had that kind of like freshman experience of like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. But it was great. And it really helped my career. I think it really helped me being able to come into like your teams and be like, I've got some wisdom and experience and I have so much confidence from it now, but like just diving in was like overwhelming, I think.
Ooh, I kind of really love that because it's like obviously two sides of that. One, heading into my career, I want to be in this space of like take helping others, helping athletes, wanting to do it at a high level, but then also like the lessons of this tax schedule, but then also having to balance taking care of you and performing, whether it's now it's not on the court anymore, but it's now my job professionally. It's like this still exists, still matters, this space of like I need to take care of myself. Um, just like the last couple weeks, I'm in this weird space of like school hasn't quite started. By the time this episode airs, I'll be in school, but basically it's like I have time now to like I've seen like okay, post grad life. Like I have time to start my career. I'm starting my own business with this podcast and also well, I have school, that's another thing right now. But then taking care of myself, like I've like completely forgot about that just in the couple weeks after season. Like I thought, okay, I had this foundation of like this is my routine, this is the time I take care of myself, this is what works for me when I want to like um decompress. And then I'm starting these new things and I like completely forget. Like I'm like, okay, I'll push myself, fill up my time in these ways, and then I'm like, yeah, I'm being productive. I'm working on my podcast, going to school, doing work, and then I'm like, wait a second, I completely forgot about like taking care of myself and I'm like burning out throughout the week and I'm like, oh my God, why am I so tired? Oh my gosh, why am I so irritable? Why am I so like hating life right now, even though my life is good. Like I'm doing all these great things, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is still a thing. I still have to like keep up with that. Can you talk about that change for you? Like you've like learned pretty in your like college career, like what taking care of yourself looked like for an athlete, and then maybe taking care of yourself now as a professional in the space. Maybe the differences, what does it look like? Tell us about that.
I think it's so much of like feedback and checking in with yourself. I think that is what I've realized as I've gotten a bit older. Coming into private practice, there was a period in November of this year, we're doing this in early mid-January, where I was like, oh, I'm irritable. I don't feel like I'm doing great with my work. And then it's like, all right, let me take a step back instead of just be like, I'm not doing like, just that frustration part. Let me take a step back and it's like, I'm seeing too many people. I'm not sleeping well. I'm saying yes to too many social obligations. Like I'm probably trying to travel. Like there's too much. And so let me like kind of scale down some different things and then gear up a little bit. And I think that there's always going to be phases where you're stressed out, but then what are the little things that you need to kind of like cut or balance, or what chapter are you in? And I think for me, end of December and early January were more of I'm going to try to see less people, not take on as many, exercise a little bit more, not say as much to social obligations or leave social obligations earlier, cut travel. And so I think so much of it is like learning to listen to my body and my emotions more on like what I need. And then like, what are the things that you have to do, obviously, but then with like your extra time, what do you need? And mine's changed so much. I think for a while, like having the most vivid social life was what filled me up and also just like took me away from I think my career in a way of like, let's take off the Dr. Chad hat and just be a lot of my friends up here call me Chade, and that's just like a middle school thing. But kind of take off that hat and really like forget about work for a minute. And then there's times where it's like, I'm just going to need more sleep to be mentally sharp. And so I think so much of it is trying to be intuitive on like what your body and what your mind needs. And it takes a really long time because I feel like the things that I was irritable and frustrated about recently were just more because I was overloaded. And being able to kind of step back and just sort of assess that and be like, let me have a period of some like micro recovery for like kind of this next period where I'm going to hustle. And I think trying to take it more from a sustainability lens versus a sprint, burnout, rebuild kind of phase. And I think that's one of the bigger things that I would probably say for young people is there is a period of like the sacrifice and working hard, but like try to make it sustainable. I think you see a lot of people sprint, really climb their career ladder really quickly, but then burn and fall versus like, can we make this just more sustainable and have some more longevity, I think, to it too is definitely an important emphasis on how to do that once you have your own like time and schedule.
Yeah, that's definitely a good reminder for me as I'm in this space. And that just like longevity, sustainability, like this whole like idea of like, can we like, how do we get up and do it over again? Like, what's a day that we can do where we can get up and do it over and over and over again? Oh, I have a question for you. Like, in terms of like 20s, like with the social life, like, and I think you can relate to this too, because it's like there's a balance of like, oh, like social life is helpful. Like, I need like just genuine time of being with my friends and letting loose, but then also like I'm chasing a career and I'm doing things. How did you find that balance for you? Like, I guess that's the space I'm in. So I'm like, oh, should I take an hour to go hang out with my friends? But like, oh, what if that hour was like good, like really good work I could have put in. You know what I'm saying? So it's like choosing what do I do?
Um, I think the simplest way to try to look at it is in your experience, whether you were working or socializing, did that fill up your bucket or did that drain your bucket? Or is there a certain amount of socializing that'll fill up your bucket and then you go get like some rest, which will fill it up even more? Um, I think one of the big challenges in the early 20s for some people, if you're still with like college friends or high school friends, or maybe, past teammates, is you just start to see more people go in different directions every few years. Like you first see it like in high school with people like high school versus college and different things going in different directions. And then how do you try to have as many people that are in similar directions as you if you feel like they're good, positive influences, and then people that you might have, really great relationships with, like you don't have to follow them and be out with them till 2 in the morning. Like you can go hang out with them till like 10 and, go sleep and kind of separate and not like fully follow some of these things. And so I think that is something that's really challenging in your 20s is to start to look at like kind of picking your own path and who's going to be in that when you see some other people that may be frustrated or upset with your evolution as a person, and you can still be friends with them, but maybe you don't have as much attachment to them and start to navigate social life. I think that way is something that I think is really important. I would never say like stop hanging out with anybody and don't do anything, because I did it for a while and it's very lonely and isolating, and you may climb your career ladder really quick, but like it's also pretty like lonely and not super fun. But then you also, just don't need to socialize 110% and neglect that. Like there's a nice little balance to it. And so I think finding, what's your sweet spot for spending time with people, but then also like resting and recovering. And then like just accepting that, one thing that I read that was really helpful for me was instead of FOMO, it was like JOMO. So it was like the joy of missing out, and like
Mm,
being okay with just like, yeah, I'm gonna leave at 10, this is cool, like I had a good time. I think that from a perspective in my 20s was really helpful for my career development, and I think even in my 30s now, just kind of understanding like how to balance like having a good social life and unwinding, but then not really like negatively impacting yourself, I think is a good like life skill to have.
gotcha. Yeah, I know that's something I definitely needed to hear, and other people, I hope they find that helpful as well. We've touched on like the difference between mental health and sports psych. Um, we've went back and forth on our college experiences, but something that we've talked about that has been helpful for me in my mental health journey is this. I call it meds versus movement. Like, I remember starting off with mental health, and it was like, you are diagnosed with depression. It's something you have. It's like kind of who you are, and it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. So you take medicine for it, and then working with you, like learning this idea of like this doesn't sound super sciencey, but it's I'll explain it like super briefly. It's like neuroplasticity of like your brain like makes connections based like the stronger the ones you're using more, they get stronger. And then like learning like it's not the meds for me, it's more about my lifestyle and how I carry myself that affects my mental. But like I wouldn't have gone to this place had I not started on meds. So like um again like meds versus movement, what's your take on that? Like prescribed meds versus hey, do you need this or is this more like hey, let's look at your lifestyle and the choices you're making that are probably affecting your mental. But yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think the first disclaimer with what I'll be talking about is, me as a psychologist, I don't prescribe medication. I like to work a lot with either psychiatrists or psychiatric nurse practitioners or even just general physicians that prescribe medications in terms of that. Have taken a lot of classes on psychopharmacology and, worked with a lot of people that have been on meds and trying to just kind of talk through how to have some of those conversations with, people that prescribe medications. And the way that I was taught in grad school that I really like for medications is it's this idea of a window of opportunity for a lot of people. There's some different classifications that I think are important with like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. A lot of time, those medications can be really important for just being able to like function. And so those are like the ideas of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. And those can be really helpful to just reduce the amount of distress you're going through so that you can just like function in life. There's same thing for like debilitating OCD. A lot of times that those are medications where you can almost look at it like monitoring your insulin if you have diabetes. Like it's something that is a pain, but something that you have to do to be able to like function and be the best version of yourself. So that's like, I think a different classification than what we're talking about of what can sometimes be called like the common cold of depression and anxiety in terms of like mental health, versus some more of like the severe mental health disorders
Yeah.
that sometimes are more biological in nature. Like a lot of times, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia really have like a genetic underloading that after like stressful experiences can really activate that, where medication can be very essential to those. And then one of the things, if you look at with depression and anxiety that I really liked was this idea of like a window of opportunity theory. And so if I'm working with somebody that is so anxious or so depressed that they're not able to get out of bed on time. They're not able to change their self-talk. They're really not able to focus to the point where just the skill work and the inner work and the therapy is just like not effective. Then medication can reduce that distress enough so that you can start like building some of these skills. It'd be just like if we use like a volleyball analogy, if you're a club volleyball player and you're just learning how to play, we're not going to put you in as the libero against Nebraska. Like it's gonna be too hard for you. And so what you can look at from an analogy standpoint is taking the medications like makes it less hard. Like you're going to feel better, you're going to be functioning more, your mood's probably going to be more stable, and then you can start, it's just going to be easier to do the inner work to build that confidence to get yourself in better routines to be able to manage things to the point where then you most likely will be able to get off of some of those medications and be okay. And so there's some different like classifications with that. And so a lot of times what you can do is look at like, can I try therapy first to see if that intervention is helpful and then try medications. I always recommend if you're on medications to combine it with therapy to continue to build some of those skills. But sometimes people will have pretty good response with just a very low level of psychiatric medication where they can kind of do some of the work on their own too. And so I think that there isn't necessarily like a pure textbook component to it. Um, I also look at it where if you are lost and you know I need to start taking care of my mental health, just take a step in any direction. Like just start that journey. And if it feels easier to start with medication, great. Like medication and maybe read self-help books, like at least you're working on this and doing your best to try to move forward with that. If it feels easier for therapy, like awesome too. But that ability to step into the vulnerability of taking care of your mental health, I think is like the most important step. So that's how I try to look at the complexity of navigating some of those components as well.
I really love that, and I think that's gonna be really helpful for listeners, even parents too, like understanding what this looks like. I remember like when I started on this journey, my parents were super supportive and helpful with, I guess, any direction that I needed to take. So that was nice to have that support, but that may not be the case for everyone. So I think that was just super helpful and like a lot of good information. I also wanted to ask you, in terms of like mental health, sports psychology, it's kind of like a merging thing. Like this wasn't a thing really not that long ago. So I guess like where would you hope to see where this goes? Like what would be like ideal for you in this world of like pressure and overload of information and all of that?
It's really tricky to identify that. I mean, I think that we need more providers, but we need more providers just generally, I think, you know, in terms of that and being able to have more helpful systems with easier access. I think the challenge is just a lot of times not having enough providers. I think that also just building more systems for athletics that are building up people, but then also being very like supportive and growth oriented. Not everybody needs to be playing professional support, like playing professional sports. I think that's like huge with this. So I think that's a big part of it. I think that at the high school level, being able to figure out really good like preventative work on just the general basics with our education system on here's how you sleep well, here's how you take care of yourself, like here's how you can manage stress and anxiety. And having it, I think, be more wellness focused is, I think, going to be really important from just like a preventative standpoint. I think that that would be really huge, I think, too. And I think as generations get older, I think there's been more support on like here's how we build up people that are going through these high pressure environments. And I think that's really huge. I think the more that coaches and parents can get education on how to help their kids continue to grow, and you don't necessarily need to wrap them in bubble wrap and not have them avoid the world. I think that's actually more problematic. But how do we put kids in challenging environments where they're going to grow and be confident, but then also support them from afar so that they can build their confidence is, I think, essential to like the growth of our society. And so how we do that in sport, I think can be one of the best outlets for that from like a life skill standpoint. But the way that the programming and the messaging and the way that practice works needs to be, I think, more intentional versus just let's make money and get you to college. Like let's actually look at kind of the growth part. So I think the more we're able to do that, then we also don't need as many providers. So I think that's a big component is I think for everybody to pause and really look at like what type of culture of sport do we want in the United States? Can we get a little bit away from profit and get more to growth? Which I think is easier said than done too. I think is something that's really important.
I really love that answer. Like, I guess in the space of like the world I want to be in and grow in, and it's kind of a space I'm like creating for myself. Like,
Mhm.
and I agree with everything you just said. Like, I wish it was more about like growth in the athletes, not just money and going to college, but like, especially now, I think it's going to be changing. But it's nice to hear that like other people think like that too. I also thought of another question, especially for young people now, because I think I brought this up to you during one of our meetings. It was like, um, there's like TikToks and like Instagram reels and Instagram accounts. Like that's so great of mental health, but there's a lot of like I literally read something the other day and it was like if you sleep a lot, that's a sign that your body is in like basically shutdown mode and that like your nervous system is like shutting down and like you might have a chronic disease or like you are basically like your body's going into overdrive. And then I was like, oh my God, I am sleeping a lot. I take a lot of naps. Like if anyone knows me, like I can nap anywhere. And I'm like, oh my gosh, am I in survival mode? And I'm like, wait, no. I need to take a step back and be like, I'm just doing a lot. Like, and I'm gonna be tired. So like, um, for young people reading these things, like how do they kind of navigate all the information?
The challenging part with social media right now, and I feel like the old 36-year-old who's like, manage your social media, and it's super hard. But I think one of the things there needs to be an education on how the algorithms work. And I like have noticed that as, someone that's been on social media my whole life is if you look up something, you're going to just get fed more and more polarizing and intense content. And I think that that's something that I really noticed at UNLV because that's where I think the algorithms got really nuanced was TikTok's free, but it's going to get money from your attention, right? And so it wants you to be engaged in it because that's how they make money is engagement. And so it's just going to feed you more and more intense polarizing stuff. And so if you end up going down kind of that depression rabbit hole of like maybe some basic wellness tips, eventually you're going to hit a point where the stuff that they're showing you is like wild, absurd, and very inaccurate. And I think that that's where it's really hard is you're going to slowly get fed that until you're like, what's reality or what's not? And anybody can post anything. And I think that that's what's really tricky because you can get in those rabbit holes like that. I think I see that a lot with trauma, where the idea of trauma has gotten very pushed into like any little thing is traumatic to a point where then you feel like it's traumatic and then that can also like impact it. So it's called concept creep. And I think it's a really challenging thing to navigate. And so I think it's being really mindful of what algorithm rabbit holes you go down and trying to find helpful information, but then it's hard to discern helpfulness. So I think really be mindful of your social media use, set limits. It can be really awesome and funny. I love sending memes to people and sharing things, but then like just be aware of kind of what hole you're getting down and be able to sort of question that and look for some other information, and Healthline can be really helpful. There could be some other like websites where you can kind of get some good information, but I think a lot of times it's just knowing the more you're engaged in an algorithm, the more polarizing it's going to get, and it's probably going to get less and less accurate.
That's really good to know. I think that's like probably a big thing, especially now, like whatever's going on with TikTok, but it's just social media in general, is a big thing now. Dr. Chad, thank you so much for literally everything. Now bringing it back to you, you've been so helpful, and I hope the listeners come back from this episode like life changed because every single time I talk to you or meet with you, I felt like, oh, like life is good again. And like I remember coming in the locker room like after meeting with you and being like, guys, I'm good. You just gotta go talk to Dr. Chad and like everything will be fine again. Um, but tell us, how do you feed your soul? You've dealt with like tons of different levels of pressure, athletics at different levels, literally like just learning what it means to take care of yourself. How do you feed your soul?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I've learned in my all of my journeys is when I was at my worst, I was isolated. Like I
Mm.
think that's like what it really came down to was, going and moving to a bunch of places. I had this idea for a long time that as long as I have internet connection and video games and can text people, I'm gonna be like fine on the back end. And like that was so like not true, like at all. And it was hard because, put your heart and your soul into working with people and then you just feel that creep down. And I think coming back home, having tons of friends here, having my parents live really close, having my brother live, a few hours away, it's for me, it's really easy to just go socialize and crack up and laugh and, go golf or just go on a walk and really for me be able to take off the career hat, I think is really helpful because when I wasn't able to do that and feel really isolated, it was hard for me to do. And so I think I wasn't able to really like self-talk my way out of I'm more than a sports psychologist. I had to go like find activities that really allowed me to do that. And so like my feed the soul a lot of times is just being able to take off the hat and go hang out with my friends or my family and do stuff with other people that reminds me that like my value isn't just am I helping these student athletes or my clients or helping this team win and really like living that, I think. And so for me, it's not necessarily one activity. It just ebbs and flows all the time. But if I'm doing it with people that I know love and care for me, despite like what I do professionally, then I'm good. And it took a while to figure that out. I think that's part of being a young professional. But I think in my journeys, that's been like really reinforced by looking at like what's actually going to be like sustainable to do awesome stuff, but then, you know, do it in a way where consistently I'm going to be in a good place to like help all the people out that I want to work with.
I really like that because moving away from college, that kind of made me like question like, oh yeah, I'm fine without my family. But then like later on, I was like, wait, maybe I do need my family. Or like, um, especially with career, like, and I know you probably are very invested in like helping people genuinely fills you up, but it's like it still gets exhausting. And that's how I'm like what I'm finding with the space I'm doing. I'm like, I love doing all these things. I love going to coach and then going to work and engaging with fans and then having a podcast. Like I love all these things, but it still makes me tired. I still need a break from it. And it's like, oh, I still need a break from things even though I enjoy them. It's like weird, but like it's those are still jobs. But
Mhm.
like I really like how you just talk about like taking off the hat and like um guess what that's how you've found like that's what works for you. I guess. But is there anything else we want to touch on before we wrap this up?
I think we hit a bunch of good stuff in our time. Absolutely. I mean, if other stuff comes up, definitely let me know. But yeah, I mean, it's good time and glad that I mean, it's awesome that you're doing this and continuing to thrive and grow. So good to see that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely you're a huge part of my journey, so more thanks to you in doing that.
Yeah.
Well, for the listeners, thank you so much for being here, especially if you're still listening up to this point. I really hope a lot of you are again because it's super helpful information. But um, go find a way to take care of yourself today and just enjoy being you, like someone that doesn't tie themselves to their sport, or just find some space for you to live and be with people that love you for who you genuinely are. Um, And thank you so much for being here and stay tuned for the next episode.